Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well informed. We live in this world just flooded with information, right? How do we even start to figure out what really matters? Today, we're digging into a bunch of sources that seem to connect some pretty different topics: the way the euro is built, this big push for digital money, and maybe quieter, this move towards digital ID. Our job here is to pull out the really surprising bits, the key takeaways, especially how money policy and digital tech are kind of merging and what that could mean for countries and for you personally. We're mainly looking at a YouTube transcript. It features Arno Wellens, a financial journalist, and someone from the Dutch bank. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, let's start right at the beginning, the euro itself. The sources talk about a core problem, like a weave fault in its design. What are they actually getting at there?
Right. The key thing here isn't just that the euro has issues. It's that it seems it was designed with this instability built right in. The whole idea was, a step towards a more federal Europe. But sticking really different economies, think Greece versus Finland into one money system, well, that basically guarantees this weave fault. And that leads almost inevitably to these big trade imbalances. And then debt crises, especially hitting the weaker Southern European countries, their exports just struggle, while imports get easier for them to buy.
Okay, so if the politics for a real federal superstate kind of stalls out because politicians make promises like, no more money to Greece, who jumps in to rescue the euro when things go wrong?
Yeah, that's where the European Central Bank steps up, the ECB. We saw that really clearly with Mario Draghi, didn't we? His whole whatever it takes thing, which meant, well, a lot of money printing and pushing interest rates down, down, down. But, those tools get blunt after a while. You can't just keep buying bonds forever or keep cutting rates. And that road leads straight to negative interest rates.
Right, and those negative interest rates have huge implications, don't they? They seem to be pushing central banks into completely new territory. Is this where the digital currency idea really picks up steam? Because if rates go negative, people will just pull cash out of the bank, right? It's just common sense. So how does that simple human reaction fuel this drive for digital money?
That takes us right to what the banks call the zero lower bound problem. It's basically interest rates are already so low, near zero, maybe even negative. So cutting them more doesn't really stimulate the economy like it's supposed to. Because why would you leave your money in the bank if it's losing value? You just take out the cash. And to get around that problem, central banks start seriously looking at central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. So you see this direct line from what sources call a crippled currency union to needing digital money. And then down the road, needing a digital passport to manage it all.
And Christine Lagarde has announced this digital euro. The sources mention two types, or variants. What are they, and what's the real difference between them?
Yeah, there are two main flavors being talked about, and the difference is actually pretty crucial for you to grasp. First, there's what they call the token-based one. Think of it like an old chip-nip card, or maybe your public transport card, like a preloaded card. The value's on the card itself, kind of. The central bank wouldn't necessarily know your exact balance or every little thing you buy. And you'd have a limit that they mentioned, maybe 3,000 digital tokens, something like that.
Okay, like digital cash in a limited way?
Sort of. But then there's the login variant, and this one's totally different. It needs a European digital passport to use it. And with that one, the central bank knows exactly what you're doing with your money, every transaction. And they can apply interest rates directly to your digital wallet. The sources say the Dutch bank wants to launch both at the same time. But that login version, it's delayed, apparently until Q3 2026. Because building that whole digital passport system takes time, another year or so.
So the official report on a digital euro gives reasons for bringing it in. What are those official reasons, and, well, how solid are they, according to these sources?
Well, the report throws out a few arguments that, frankly, the sources find pretty weak, almost funny, they say, like viruses jumping between banknotes, which, the report itself admits isn't really a thing, or the carbon footprint of moving cash around.
Okay, so maybe not the strongest arguments?
Not really. But the real reason, the big one, according to the sources, is monetary policy transmission.
Right. Explain that a bit more.
Okay, so the ECB is stuck, right? They need to fight inflation, which means raising interest rates. But if they raise rates too much, those heavily indebted Southern European economies could, well, collapse. It's a real dilemma. A CBDC, especially that login version, changes the whole equation for them. It lets them push interest rates deep into negative territory to try and stimulate the economy, without everyone just pulling their cash out. It solves that zero lower bound problem we talked about.
I see.
So, yeah, the insight here isn't really about clean money or saving fuel. It's about giving the central bank more control over the economy.
But hang on, for you listening, we already have instant payments on our phones, right? We have debit cards, credit cards, even things like WeRo rolling out across Europe. So with all that already available, what's the actual selling point of a CBDC for just the average person? Why does it seem so difficult to get people excited about it?
And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What's in it for the citizen? The sources really hammer this point. There's just a lack of clear benefits for regular people. They give the example of the Bahamas. They launched their CBDC, the sand dollar. But nobody really used it, even when they apparently offered people incentives like $50 to use it at some festival. Usage barely moved, from like 0.01% to 0.02%. It just didn't catch on.
Wow, even with free money.
Yeah. And the sources also suggest that down the line, shopkeepers might just be forced to accept it. They might have to buy new equipment and just deal with it.
So less of a carrot, more of a stick, potentially.
It kind of sounds that way, based on this material, which explains why it's a tough sell to the public. They just don't see what they gain.
Okay, connecting these pieces. This digital euro isn't just about the money itself. You mentioned it's tied to this digital passport. Where did that idea even come from?
Well, according to the sources, there's a pretty powerful lobby pushing for it. They specifically mention MasterCard. And interestingly, they also point to the Queen of the Netherlands being involved with some foundation linked to MasterCard.
Really?
Yeah. But the main driver, the great driver, as the source puts it, is identified as the World Economic Forum, the WEEF. And this isn't just speculation, apparently. It's documented in an official Dutch parliamentary letter, a camera brief. They give the number, 2000061944, page 3.
Okay, so it's documented.
So yeah, it looks like this isn't just some dry technical banking project. It seems to have some very influential backers with a specific agenda.
That is a powerful detail. So what's the WEF's reason? What's their stated economic argument for pushing this kind of all-in-one digital ID?
It apparently comes down to money, specifically lost online sales. Klaus Schwab's Strategic Imperative report is cited. It identifies this huge missed opportunity, something like 4,000 billion US dollars a year lost because people abandoned their online shopping carts.
4,000 billion! That's
Sure,
enormous!
That's a staggering number. And the reason, they say, is friction. You know, having to switch from your social media app to your banking app to pay for something, that little bit of effort makes people drop off. So the WEF's proposed fix, integrate everything, social media, banking, maybe even your health data, all into one single app. The argument is it creates a better user experience, smoother, which they believe encourages more impulse buying and captures all that abandoned revenue.
Wow. So a single digital identity to make impulse shopping easier, essentially? But hold on, the sources said the Dutch parliament actually voted against this digital passport idea, didn't they? How did the government move forward if parliament rejected it?
Yes, that's what the sources state quite clearly. The Dutch parliament, the second chamber, explicitly voted it down. There was a motion by Rens Gelein from the Socialist Party.
So a clear rejection.
Seems so. But according to the sources, the government essentially just ignored it. They used the phrase, set aside the Constitution. The implication is that they prioritized what these big tech companies and the WEF wanted over the democratic vote of parliament.
Set aside the Constitution. I mean, that's a very strong accusation from the sources. And this kind of brings us to another theme that pops up in the material, this idea of a crisis mindset. How has that been used, according to these sources, to push these big digital changes through?
The sources link it directly to the pandemic response. They talk about French senators mentioning Madame Guillotin by name, who apparently visited China, and they reportedly came back praising China's digital control methods, things like ankle monitors for people in quarantine in Hong Kong.
Ankle monitor?
Yeah. And the sources emphasize the context there. Hong Kong shifting from that two systems, one country promise with free speech to violently cracking down on student protests, introducing things like death penalties based on opinion, leading to what the sources call Pavlovian obedience. And this, they suggest, was sort of held up as a model.
That's quite disturbing context.
It gets even more alarming. There's mention of a specific French report, Machin 673, about using digital passports for pandemic control. This report apparently suggests, and this is shocking, that not all races are equal when it comes to resisting diseases. And it proposes using genetic data gathered from these digital patient projects to actually isolate specific racial groups.
Wait, using genetic data to isolate races?
That's what the sources claim is in the report. They describe it as a flagrant violation of Article 1 of the Dutch Constitution, the part about non-discrimination.
Those are incredibly serious claims cited by the sources, a profound violation of basic rights, if true. It really echoes the title of Arno Wellens' book, Demokratie op de Helling, Democracy on the Slide. Is this erosion of rights, as the sources see it, still happening now that the immediate pandemic fear has faded a bit?
According to the sources, yes, absolutely. It just continues, but now it's often linked to a different crisis, the war in Ukraine. They mentioned a proposed law in the Netherlands, the Law on Defense Readiness, from Minister Ruben Brekelmans. This law, they claim, would allow selecting minors for military service based on race and sexuality, and grant access to their private electronic health records.
Again, based on race and sexuality.
Yes, which the sources again call a flagrant violation of Article 1. Plus, it apparently involves sharing this incredibly sensitive data with the United States. And there's more, the European Health Data Space. This is an EU law that, the sources argue, basically overrides national laws about your right to refuse having your medical data bought and sold.
So your national rights could be overridden by this EU law.
That's the assertion. They point to a specific part, recital 17.2, which they say implies forced consent. It even apparently suggests, quite chillingly, that if you don't want your health data traded, well, maybe you should just avoid healthcare.
That's quite a statement.
It really is. And this whole thing, the sources argue, shows the EU overstepping its bounds, violating the principle of subsidiarity.
Subsidiarity, remind us what that means.
Right. It's the idea that decisions should be made at the lowest possible level. The EU is supposed to handle things like trade, big picture stuff, not ethical questions about healthcare or education or defense. Those should be national issues. But the sources claim that through clever accounting and legal tricks, the EU is relabeling things. Healthcare becomes trade because, well, medical data can be sold. And by doing that, they argue the EU is taking over areas that should be decided nationally based on national ethics.
Okay, that's a complex picture, moving from pandemic controls to defense readiness laws to health data. But how is all this digital transformation actually being paid for? The Corona funds gets mentioned a lot.
Yes, the Corona funds. That's the huge 800 billion euro EU recovery fund set up ostensibly because of COVID-19. But here's a key point the sources make. Ursula von der Leyen announced her digital decade vision way back in July 2019, before anyone had heard of COVID-19.
Ah, interesting timing.
Very interesting timing. It strongly suggests, according to the sources, that the pandemic wasn't the reason for the digital push, but maybe a convenient justification for an agenda that already existed.
So how was that 800 billion actually spent? Did it go to pandemic relief?
Well, that's another point the sources raise. They claim less than 100 million euros out of that massive 800 billion actually went to healthcare in the Netherlands. And there was apparently a one-year delay before payouts even started, which suggests it wasn't really about tackling an acute crisis immediately. The vast majority of the money, they argue, was earmarked for digital solutions.
Digital solutions? Like what?
Well, it ties into things like Project Gaia X. This was a big German-French digital project. Yeah. But controversially, it involved the company Palantir. The sources describe Palantir as a killer drone company.
Palantir.
Okay. And apparently, when some European companies protested Palantir's involvement, they were the ones excluded from the project. The result, according to the sources, European data ended up being moved onto Microsoft's cloud servers, where Palantir could access it.
That sounds complicated and potentially worrying for data privacy.
And then there's the debt burden. Who pays back this $800 billion? Well, the repayments don't even start until after 2027. And they stretch out all the way to 2057.
2057, wow.
Long after the politicians who voted for it are gone.
Great.
And the sources also flag a major miscalculation on the interest payments, an extra 24 billion euros per year, which they predict will almost certainly mean higher taxes or cuts to social benefits for ordinary citizens down the road.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've connected the dots, as the sources see them, between the euro's design, the push for CBDCs, digital IDs. We've seen how this crisis mindset is allegedly used to push changes that impact fundamental rights, and looked at how it's all being financed through things like the Corona funds. So let's bring it back to you, the listener. What does all this actually mean? Faced with changes on this scale, what can one person or even a whole country actually do?
It's a crucial question. The sources suggest that just refusing to use a CBDC as an individual might not work in the long run, especially if, say, shops are eventually forced to accept it. So while individual action matters, the real key, according to this analysis, is awareness, understanding what's happening, and then potentially collective action through national politics.
So it comes back to the political arena.
It seems so. The sources stress that legal tools still exist. For instance, a country's prime minister or president can still use a veto vote in the European Council. They could potentially block overreaching EU laws, like the ones affecting patient data privacy, or maybe proposed bans on encryption. That democratic mechanism is still there. But it really needs people to be informed, to understand what's at stake, and to put pressure on their own national leaders to use that power if necessary.
So awareness and political engagement are key.
Exactly. The conclusion seems to be that democracy might be on the slide, as Wellens puts it. But crucially, it hasn't gone off the rails yet, I think. This fight, this debate about fundamental rights in our increasingly digital world, it's happening right now. And just knowing what's going on, understanding the connections we've talked about today, that's really the essential first step.
A powerful thought to end on. Definitely food for thought. We really encourage you to keep informing yourselves. Arno Wellens' book, Democracy Up to Helling, which we drew on today, is one place to look for a deeper dive. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time.